morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion, Scaling Energy, Myths, Microgrids, and the Race to Resilience. I'm Melissa Floyd. I'm Vice President of Corporate Communications and Marketing for Stryten Energy, and I will be your moderator today. We have a great panel with us of energy storage experts from across industry and government to discuss the current and future demands on the U.S. grid infrastructure and what the energy ecosystem should look like to solve the challenges of energy resilience. We'll hopefully dispel some myths about energy resilience, the role of microgrids, and how we can achieve that energy resilience in the United States. So without further delay, let me introduce our panelists. Scott Childers, he is Vice President of the Essential Power Division for Stryten Energy, where he champions clean, renewable energy opportunities for Stryten and actively works with utilities and original equipment manufacturers to deploy sustainable, long-duration energy storage solutions in the United States. Scott is also chairman of the Flow Battery Industry Group, which was formed by Battery Council International to bring together flow battery manufacturers and suppliers to develop approaches to address key common issues facing the industry. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Thank you. Next,
we have Dr. Vic Singh. Vic is Senior Vice President of Technology at Dragonfly Energy, where he oversees the development of next-generation lithium-ion batteries and manufacturing processes, as well as optimizing all solid-state battery chemistries for deep cycle applications. With his expertise in chemical engineering and material science, he has built an advanced research and development team of scientists and engineers across various disciplines at Dragonfly, which is headquartered in Reno, Nevada. And we have Dr. Eric Sporkey. Eric is Senior Analytics Advisor for Energy Storage at the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Electricity. Eric has a passion for energy-related research and has advocated for a wide range of battery systems and other energy storage technologies, particularly for grid-scale and long-duration applications. He was previously the Energy Storage Materials Lead at Sandia National Laboratories' Grid Energy Storage Program, and he recently served on the DOE's Energy Storage Grand Challenge National Laboratory Coordination Team. Eric seeks opportunities to connect technical innovation with market needs and priorities toward reliable, sustainable, domestic grid-scale energy storage deployment. Thank you for being here. So let's jump right into our Q&A session. It's day 2 at CES, and if you're like me, you've seen a lot of pretty amazing innovations here from around the world. We are breaking technology barriers and debunking myths about what we thought we couldn't possibly do. And energy has its fair share of myths and perhaps some fairy tales too. Lately, there's been a lot of talk about the energy transition to go all in on renewables and to completely replace the carbon-based energy generation that we have today. So Eric, I'd like to start with you and talk about some of these myths that are associated with the energy transition. How do we dispel these myths to navigate this transition successfully?
You know, one of the important things to dispel any myth is about education. So first you have to recognize what some of the myths are, and then help people understand that what they're clinging to as this potentially false narrative, really there's an advantage to getting over that. So just as an example, you know, there's been a myth for some time about the importance of using fossil sources because it has high rotating inertia, which means it's running all the time so it can respond quickly to changes in demand and supply. It turns out that batteries, for example, electrified systems, can do that typically better than these fossil products. And so for people to start to get over this idea that what we've done historically is to keep these rotating reserves running through fossil plants isn't necessarily the most economic or the most beneficial way to go about this, and that really the right way to do it is to make this transition. So as people start to become educated about, here's the real benefits, here's the economic benefit, here's why this is going to change and how this, show them the data that educates them about this, then you get into the point where you can start making improvements in efficiency, improvements in cost, and you can really help drive forward as we move through this revolution and this transformation of the energy infrastructure that we're all so excited to be part of.
Yeah, that's great. Vic, I'd like to go to you and ask what myths come to mind for you. Are there specific challenges also to this transition to other sources of energy?
Yeah, I mean, at Dragonfly, our core business model at the end of the day has been education to some degree. I mean, when we moved into RVs with lithium-ion batteries, we were largely a first mover into those markets, and whether they're OEMs or consumers, they didn't necessarily understand that technology or understand what the technical benefits could be, say, versus a diesel generator or lead acid or something else. So it's really important to understand that even if you have a good technology, a good ROI, a good manufacturing capability, high quality, if it's something new and the consumers and OEMs have been using something old for a while, there's going to be a certain element of education, even in the sales process and implementation process, that can't be taken for granted.
Yeah, education definitely is a key to overcoming some of those myths that people have, or around energy storage in particular, and grid resilience. So Scott, I'd like to ask you, what are some myths that you think we need to debunk when it comes to energy resilience in the United States?
Sure, yeah, I guess I would add to what Vic and Eric said, mostly around kind of business case development. There's a lot of thoughts out there that batteries don't quite pencil yet, that you can't make a business case around it, and that's simply not the case. I've seen a number of situations where we can make a business case out of it. It's actually an area I can carry on for quite a while, but just to make a couple of points. The utilities, there's still quite a lot of opaqueness in terms of what the utilities are charging. You hear numbers like 10 cents a kilowatt hour. It's kind of a standard around the country. But if you add demand charges in, and certain time of day use and so on, there's just expenses you don't anticipate. When you add them all up, there's plenty of opportunity to add batteries in. And then I'll maybe speak to solar for just a second. And I have a ton of empathy for solar. They went through some grinded out years where they, were underwater, not making money themselves. But now solar is to the point where it is very economical to implement, and they're protecting their margins, right? And there's cases where they could be implementing more solar if they added battery to it, but there's kind of this battle between battery and solar today. So if you do it as a system and do it collectively, you can make a business case out of it easily.
Absolutely, yes. Energy storage plus renewables is a great solution for energy resilience in the future. Yes. So recently, the U.S. Department of Energy released for comment their energy storage strategy and roadmap to optimize the DOE's energy storage investments, which builds on the energy storage grand challenge roadmap to ensure that, quote, that the American people have the resources needed when needed, which I think is really important. That's basically what grid resilience means. But Eric, I'd like to get your thoughts on, for you, what does grid resilience mean? What does that look like from a DOE perspective?
So what resilience really means is that no matter what comes, whatever challenges would come, whatever changes to the grid infrastructure come, when you flick on the light switch or you try to turn on your dryer, whatever you need, or you're operating that situation in a hospital, every time, no matter what comes, the grid responds. And you have the electricity you need when you need. So we're talking about reliability, resilience, security, and affordability. Okay, so ultimately those things all form together to really create this concept of overall resilience for every American to have access to that, whether there are hurricanes going on or the winter storms that have recently swept across the country, whether it's cyber attacks, whether it's any of these different things that can sort of strike after what is for sure the world's most complex machine, being the US grid. There's a lot of opportunity, frankly, for things to go haywire. And I think it's pretty marvelous when you really consider that. I don't know about you guys, but when I walk into my office and hit the light switch, I don't think, is the light going to come on today? No, it doesn't. I expect it to come on no matter what else is going on. And so from the perspective of the DOE, it's about ensuring as best we can that every American has access to, as I said, that electricity no matter what's going on.
Yeah, it's super important for us to have that confidence in our grid, and it is a complex system. And as we add energy storage to that, it becomes even more complex, right? So Scott, I'd like to ask you, when we think about adding long-duration energy storage to the grid, what do you think is going to help with grid resilience to really add the capacity and help the grid when it is under stress in the situations like Eric just mentioned?
Well, first of all, especially on large grid scale, right? A broad kind of nationwide grid. we need better long-duration energy storage technologies. We've been basically incumbent to one technology to this point in time, which is lithium. It's served its purpose, it's gained volume, it's been reduced in cost, but it still doesn't fit the long duration aspects of energy storage that we need in a front of meter application. And so we need new technologies in that area. Obviously Stryton's been sponsoring and putting a lot of work into vanadium flow batteries, which I think is a strong contender for being used in that application.
And Vic, I'd like to get your thoughts on just the shift that we might be seeing from lithium being just primarily focused on the EV industry, right? I think that we're seeing more and more stationary applications for lithium and opportunities for that to grow as well when there's a little bit of a slowdown on the EV side of things that we're seeing.
Sure, I mean, EVs have definitely been the driver for what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of those investments have been geared towards EV. Some definitely towards energy stationary storage as well. But as we wait to see how the markets dictate and define that transition in the automotive sector, I think this panel, we've made a lot of points. The opportunities in storage are just endless. And I agree. I think lithium is going to have some limitations from a long duration perspective, but when you start looking at niche markets that could still use this technology, shorter duration storage, behind the meter storage, distributed storage, there's still quite a bit of opportunity for lithium that hasn't been tapped yet. And with the focus now starting to maybe diversify away from EVs and into some of these other markets, I think you're going to see technologies such as lithium or even sodium or something like that start to penetrate some of these smaller markets first. I mean, that's typically a lot of the time how it works, is you see these technologies come into small niche markets, often markets that are willing to pay a premium for a new technology as it's entering and scaling, and then it moves to the larger installations. So a lot of opportunity, I think, particularly behind the meter. You'll see quite a bit of opportunity for lithium, whether it's mobile or associated with homes.
Yes, having a diversity of energy storage technologies, batteries, and even beyond batteries is going to be very important to grid resiliency, using all of the assets that we have in the right way where it makes sense, right? Scott, I'd like to ask you, what application of energy storage should we be considering when we look at the sources of energy production? So for energy storage, batteries, I mean, what pairs well with certain types of energy production, in your opinion?
Yeah, certainly. In the renewable world, obviously all the renewables are intermittent of nature, and the more renewables that we employ across the nation, the longer duration you need. People talk today about peak shaving because there's a little bit of renewables in the infrastructure. As we grow that up, you kind of start talking about like net load balancing, and then at some point you actually need firm seasonal assets in place. And so you need longer and longer duration batteries to do that job. And so technologies that are fit for that is what we need to be used in this space as we go along.
For purpose, exactly. Eric, what are your thoughts on using energy storage to drive reliability and efficiency on the grid?
I think that energy storage, I've said this before, I talked about it yesterday, it is, at the end of the day, it's an extremely versatile tool. And it brings to the mix of whatever the tools that you're using to generate and transmit and then use electricity, it really adds flexibility to that. It allows you to attack more different types of problems and challenges, some of which we don't even know about. So as we continue to see load growth, which is very real for the first time in a long time, the challenges that we're going to see around that, for those big challenges, we're going to need the most versatile, the most adaptive tools. So to me, energy storage of all kinds, so batteries certainly are one of those, but also thermal storage, mechanical storage, even different types of chemical storage, those are going to be important tools for us to advance what's coming on. And part of what I love about long duration energy storage is even though it hasn't quite got the purchase yet, and maybe it's not quite a household name for people to be able to identify long duration storage, it can do everything from short duration applications, but it can also access storage at a time scale that we really only think about now in the context of fossils. We store energy a lot right now. Right now we have energy storage in great big gas tanks. We have energy storage in piles of coal. We have energy storage with the types of energy sources we use today. What we're trying to get after here is figuring out how do we move that to the next level where it's more adaptive, where it's more controlled, and where it fits with the mix of generation sources that the country and the world are really headed towards.
So according to Bloomberg NEF, I just saw this posted recently that stationary storage installations have surged to 170 gigawatt hours in 2024. And by 2035, they expect stationary applications to account for 16% of batteries deployed globally, up from 6% just 5 years ago. And keeping our grid safe and secure is really the key to energy resilience. I think we can agree on that. And I'd like to ask Scott, as we add energy storage to the grid, what challenges does that bring and what do we need to solve for?
Yeah, as we add more storage to the grid, especially as it becomes atomized, right? So we have all different sizes of storage devices. Some of them, very large scale at the utility side. Some of them smaller even at your homes, right? And individual homes. As that starts to happen, we've got to coordinate all of these assets together, and you really need some kind of centralized brain to do that with. And so controls and decision making across the different assets is going to be a key challenge that we have to solve in the future.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask Vic, is there a consideration for having those controls and electronics that we're putting on these batteries come from a domestic source, especially as we're connecting batteries to the grid?
I'm definitely, whether it's economically driven by, say, tariff policy, or you're thinking about more from a security standpoint, there is a drive to start building these technologies domestically or with partners. But I think Eric hit on the toolkits along with Scott really well. We have a lot of different technologies that we can use to store the energy, some that are already being used today. And we have a big challenge in terms of if we start flooding the grid with this diverse array of technologies, how are we going to interconnect them, control them, leverage them in an efficient manner? But the other thing I would point out is the stresses on the resilience are just as diverse as the tools we have at our disposal to address them. And what I mean by that is whether it's cost, whether it's geography, whether it's national security, cybersecurity, the threats to the grids themselves have become quite more diverse, along with the tools we have available to address those threats. So I think keeping in mind what does it mean to be resilient to each specific use case, whether you're a small installation at home or maybe a large installation near a power plant, and then looking at the toolkits you have available and then shifting to system integration. I think those are really the three key pillars.
Yeah, I think industry is making this a serious consideration as they develop new battery technologies and applications. And I'd like to ask Eric, from the DOE perspective, what do you think about the security aspect of connecting batteries to the grid?
There's lots of ways to think about that. There's no shortage of efforts and programs. Even in the Office of Electricity, where I sit, we have entire efforts as part of that are focused on things like cybersecurity and controls, making sure there's understanding of what needs to go into making sure that those connections, as you bring them on, are secure. The interconnect queue that we've all heard these horrible nightmares about how long this takes, that process needs to include some evaluation and some assessment that helps determine to say, when we put this on there, is this going to muck up the works for the rest of the grid? That's part of why this process takes so long. So I certainly wish it was shorter, but some things, to do it right, it takes a little bit more time. One thing I do want to stress, and this echoes some points that my esteemed co-panelists here have mentioned, is putting these things into place, the process of interconnection, the process of security, the process of having this big brain that connects all of these different tools, it should not be an afterthought. So you don't build the system, you don't install the battery and think, oh gosh, when we connect this, we should really buy a system that makes it secure. No, it has to start from day one. So the planning process as you bring this in, especially for stationary storage and things you're going to connect to this huge machine, think about what needs to be in place for my cybersecurity, for my physical security. All of these things have to be brought into play from the beginning. And developers and utilities are finally starting to figure out that they can't just throw this on as a band-aid at the end. It has to be built into the system. That will lower costs, it'll make it more effective, it'll make it more efficient. And so bringing those things in from the early planning stages is something the DOE is trying to get people to understand a little bit better as they move forward with this.
And today we are seeing more and more opportunities for microgrids to ensure the energy security for critical facilities like you mentioned earlier, such as hospitals, military bases, to really withstand those exceptional, unexpected events such as a storm or national disaster or other cybersecurity threats, those sorts of things. So Scott, I'd like to ask you, is this where BESS or battery energy storage systems can play a large role?
Yeah, absolutely. BESS is really an extension of something we've been doing for a long time, right? For hospitals, for data centers, other applications, we've been doing UPS systems out there broadly and widely, and we know how to use them and deploy them for, kind of that one-off event we hope never happens, right? Like Eric said earlier, the nice thing about long-duration energy storage is as you get longer and longer in your capability, you can always use it for that shorter term application for resiliency and for emergency backup type situations. So we just get more and more feature function, and we get to use it in optimizing energy footprint as a whole, but then it of course covers our emergency situations as well.
Yes, and Eric, what do you think the future of microgrids look like? Do you think it makes sense for even non-critical applications like a neighborhood or something like that to have energy security via microgrids?
At the DOE believe that every American, whether you're in a small community or a big community, you have a right, you are entitled basically to expect reliable, resilient, and affordable electricity delivery. So that's a big part of what's going on. I certainly think that where it makes sense for microgrids and islanding and those sorts of things, we're going to see, I think, a much bigger diversity of the types of electricity. So as distributed energy resources start to become more or less established in different communities, as the grid overall just continues to evolve with individuals like all of you who decide you want to take more individual ownership of your own electricity generation and storage. Those things are changing how the grid works, and the relationship that you as a ratepayer, as a citizen, the way that you have a relationship with your utility, that's going to change. There's stories about different communities might, right now, they make investments, for example, in having a really fast response repair team that's going to go out and help tackle, this is part of a conversation I had with Scott earlier, is that they have a really fast response team. So when there's an outage, they're right on it and they get it taken care of in a short time, and that's how they're addressing that intermittency and that resilience. In other systems, maybe it makes more sense actually to have a battery system, because then it doesn't even take the half hour for the guy to jump in the truck and go fix it. It's an automated system that takes care of it, and you never even notice that there's that intermittency or that fault basically hit the line. So I think that there's going to be opportunity for a mix of microgrids for places where that makes sense and where there's connectivity issues, and especially where building extra transmission into those sites might not be cost effective or might even be feasible. There's areas in the Northeast where putting a big transmission line to connect the mainland to Nantucket Island, that was a problem, right? You got to put this big line under the ocean, and that's expensive and time consuming and difficult. And so an alternative solution in that case was they put a big battery out on the island that allows them to basically account for these changes in demand that they have during seasonal tourist visitations or when there are outages. And so they avoided the cost of having to install this huge underground cabling so that they could basically maintain their resilience. So there's lots of different opportunities that are going to come on, and many of those are going to be the result of challenges imposed by how demand and the way we use electricity continues to evolve.
Yes, having that resilience there for communities is going to be very important in the future, and particularly ones that that have a lot of exposure to weather events and things like that that can take them off the grid. I'd like to ask you, Vic, more from an industrial perspective, as an energy storage manufacturer, how does distributed energy play into what Dragonfly is thinking about, or what should industrial applications be thinking about for resiliency?
I think Dragonfly operates on a much smaller scale than what we're thinking about, quite frankly, on this panel. We're not building shipping container size installations to provide grid resilience, but something I've witnessed firsthand, providing small storage systems to mobile and stationary outfits, echoes this integration discussion we've been having. So if we want to go in and install LFP battery packs and pull out, say, a lead acid battery pack or a diesel generator somewhere with an RV, a truck, off-grid, sure, we can supply the batteries and say we're done there, but how do you charge the batteries off the alternator efficiently if it's in a vehicle? Or how are you going to charge them off the solar? How are you going to monitor them, balance them, these sorts of things? All of these problems are things we have to solve at small behind-the-meter installations. So monitoring these battery packs, monitoring the regulators, having the alternator charge regulation, the inverters, everything in an ecosystem where you can understand how the system's performing and where there's opportunity for improvement. That problem just is exponentially more complicated if you're trying to install a battery on a grid, much less an RV. Now you have all of these different sources of charging energy from the grid, from, say, distributed generation on site, and the communication becomes 10 times harder. So I think the point I would try and make is putting these things on the grid is going to be very difficult from an integration standpoint, and even small batteries being distributed to industrial applications today, you'll notice in my opinion, the successful firms are doing much more than supplying the batteries. They're integrating those batteries into systems, which is something we spend a lot of time doing at Dragonfly.
I would stress though, so I certainly agree with Vic that the challenges of putting something onto this very complex machine are significant, but I also want to emphasize that those are the same challenges for anything you want to put on the grid, whether it's a battery or it's a new gas plant or it's a nuclear reactor. Any of these things, in fact, the gas plants and the nuclear reactors add all kinds of extra complications that we don't necessarily know how to account for just now. So the good news is there's an awful lot of very smart people who are very good at this, and we've been doing it for a long time, bringing new things onto the grid and so on. So there are processes in place and there are people who are working on how to make that work efficiently. So there is hope as much as there's complication. So please don't be discouraged by that, and recognize also that those challenges are consistent whether you're putting an energy storage system onto the grid or anything else that you would want to put on there. So that regardless of what the path forward looks like, those are challenges that people are working hard to meet.
Eric, do you think there will still be a place for carbon-based energy generation sources like generators like Reluctance is using to power the battery in microgrids of the future?
Sure, it depends on when the future is. Turns out I do not have a crystal ball, but if we want to become the best versions of ourselves as a civilization, that means taking advantage of all of the resources we have available in the right application space, right? So that means some of it will involve that great big glowing nuclear fusion reactor that's up in the sky, right? So we'll use solar energy, we'll use the wind, we'll use geothermal, we'll use the waves, we'll use some element of fossil fuels, we'll use some of these things, we'll use nuclear energy on the planet. So we'll use the things that become available to us because that's the smartest way to take advantage of what we have, right? Maybe there's some people here who are hunting peck, but when I type, I use all my fingers. It's more efficient than just using a single digit. I can get the document typed with my pointy finger, but it's better if I go after it with all my fingers. So use the resources that you have, and I think we'll get after a more efficient use of this and overall improve as a civilization.
I'd like to take a second to fast forward, think about 5 or 10 years in the future if we were having this same panel discussion. What would we be talking about around energy resilience? Would we be talking about the same things, or would the challenges be different? And Eric, I'll let you start.
At the end of the day, the ultimate challenge is the same. It's going to be how do we make sure that we've got electricity when and where we need it for everybody. I think in 5 years, we'll have seen some significant load growth. So the grid is going to be asked to do more than it has ever been asked to do. And so some of the challenges that will come on will reflect that those, we won't be talking about the same things because we've never experienced this much electricity running through the grid in the United States. So I think that that's part of what we will be challenged with. In 5 years, I am also optimistic and enthusiastically encouraged that we will have a new set of tools that will be better validated, that will be better tested, that will be better shown what they can do. So we'll understand better not just the challenges, but oh wow, look, we have new tools that we can get after, some of which are in this conference this week. There's some amazing creative things that are going to be brought to bear that'll help us understand how we want to evolve. There's even resources that are going to help accelerate that. So things like the recently opened grid storage launchpad that the DOE has opened up at Pacific Northwest National Lab. This is an exciting new facility that's going to give an opportunity to take emerging technologies and validate them, prove out what they can do. So looking at basically how can we believe what's coming on board and how can we understand and trust these new tools, that's part of what we'll have, again, in 5 years, is new technologies, better confidence in some of these new technologies, and a new set of challenges that we can try to address through some of these new tools. So it's going to be exciting. The ultimate challenge is the same, make sure everybody has electricity when they want it, but what we want it for and how we get it there, there's going to be a whole new set of technologies and tools and opportunities that I'm excited to talk about in 5 years. Have me back.
We will. Vic, what about from your perspective? What do you think we'll be talking about 5-10 years in the future?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Eric said. I think when we look at this transition, it's almost like a spectrum, and what I mean by that is, if you go to Singapore today, you're going to see burgeoning hydrogen economy, you're going to see flow batteries on the grid, really advanced technology. Whereas, if you go somewhere else in the world, some of the folks would argue that technology isn't industrialized yet. But then if I go to India and visit my grandparents' farm out in the middle of nowhere, they're still using a diesel generator to power electronics when the grid doesn't provide them electricity. And what little storage they do have hooked up to an inverter is a small lead acid battery. So that's the spectrum. I think in 5 years, it'll be really interesting to see the markets that are interested in the new tools available. What are those new tools? What does that implementation look like? But just the general adoption of these cleaner technologies and making them more cost efficient and accessible to new markets. I think in 5 years we're going to see, hopefully, things that were only being used in the Western world today being implemented in markets that were much more cost sensitive otherwise. So new technologies and then broader implementation and scaling of technologies we have today is what I would hope to see in 5 years.
Scott, what are your thoughts about where we'll be in 5-10 years in the future?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of these sentiments. The technologies are emerging, the chemistries are coming on, the non-chemical related, the mechanical type technologies and others are coming to bear. So the technologies are emerging. Like I said earlier, there's going to be more systems integration stuff. So we're going to be seeing, it's starting now, we're going to see that, we're going to still be seeing that in the next 5 years for sure. Like Vic said, scaling up and costing down, right? Getting the costs out of the system. But I also think we're going to be seeing a lot of, in the non-technical world, policy-related stuff, right? So as the system stuff starts to emerge on the market, there's going to be a lot of debate about who the players are and who gets to use the technology and so on. And I think policy is going to help us down that path. We have markets today, ERCOT, PJM, and others that are kind of working towards deregulation and allowing the energy market to kind of be a free market and serve itself. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and we need policy to help direct us down that path.
The other thing I'll add that sort of echoes that is that we've talked a little bit, I emphasized in my comments, the end use. But there's leading up to that, there's the front end, right? So there will be, in 5 years, I am excited about how much new manufacturing and industry and workforce development certainly in the United States, I expect that to grow tremendously. So if you look at the projections of where battery-based manufacturing in the United States has grown in the last few years and is predicted to grow based on planned facilities, it's pretty awesome. There's actually a post that my boss, Eric Shea at Office of Electricity, put on LinkedIn. Go check it out. That shows this evolution along the corridor from the Great Lakes down towards about Georgia. The enormous amount of manufacturing that's coming into this country, it is awesome. And I love that the US, I hope, in 5 years is continuing to invest in what is a global economy and a global industry, educating a new generation of workers and a new generation of establishing a new generation of manufacturing knowledge base that I would love to see really become centralized and dominant in the United States.
That's great, and I think I can speak on behalf of Stride Energy and Dragonfly Energy that we are committed to that too from a domestic perspective, really helping grow manufacturing here in the U.S., scale up our capabilities and educate a new workforce that's going to be working in this energy ecosystem to help us manage all of the electrification that's coming our way, right, and the energy demand. So I'd like to just close things out with an opportunity for each of our panelists to give a few key takeaways that they would like the audience to have today from this discussion. So I'll start with you, Vic, to give us what your takeaways are that you would like the audience to remember after we conclude this discussion.
So I mean, I think I'm an engineer by training, and so I'll try and get back to the technology for my final thoughts. In my opinion, I think the technology is there. I think if one thing you could take away from this panel is that if we can agree that the problem is grid resilience or a more sustainable energy future, I think we can all agree that we have a pretty big toolbox at our disposal. The question is, you know, when you factor in the stresses that require the resilience and some other factors such as cost, which one of those tools makes the most sense? And it'll be up to the markets, government, and industry to make that decision process as efficient as possible.
Thank you. Scott, what are some final thoughts you'd like the audience to take away from our conversation today?
Sure, I'd just like to see us go faster. I think ultimately we haven't been picking the winners yet, but I think if they're not emerging, we're going to have to pick a couple just so they get the volume they need and we get the cost down and get the scale up that we need. Of course, we're going to, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to move into systems and integration design, and I think that's also going to drive standardization as well. You know, organizations in the past like IEEE and SAE, they build up over time based on a need for a lot of people working together collectively and collaboratively, and I think we're going to see a lot of that as well.
Great, and Eric, I will give you the last word again.
So the Department of Energy is working very hard to try to implement what we can, but at the end of the day, the Department of Energy does not do the change that's needed. They're not the ones who are going to be responsible. That's all of you people. So this is the most exciting opportunity of your lifetimes to work on a system which is going to have legacy for generations. So go get it. This is your chance. Go take care of it. The Department of Energy will help you where we can, for sure. That's what they're committed to. That's what I'm committed to. But ultimately, this is your opportunity. So I really strongly encourage everybody, go find your opportunity, use your creativity, use your resources, use your energy, bring it to bear because you are addressing something which is important and long-lasting, and I really can't think of very many other things that you could do with your time and your careers that would be better served than working on these challenges. So please, again, just go get it. I love it.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your insights today around myths that we need to dispel and what we need to do to really use what we have and scale it up to have a resilient energy ecosystem and secure grid for all Americans to have the power that they need today and into the future. So thank you for being here, and thank you for our audience being here, and enjoy the rest of your time at CES.